The woman standing in front of me looked like she had not slept in weeks. Her coat was torn at the sleeve. Her hair was tangled. One hand held a crying baby against her chest, while the other desperately searched through an almost empty purse. Then she looked up, and my entire world stopped. It was my daughter, Mara, the same daughter I had been told was resting comfortably at her husband's family estate 3 states away. The same daughter whose handwritten letter had told me not to worry. But now she was standing in a grocery store, shaking, exhausted, and trying to buy a single container of baby formula with a handful of coins. I stepped toward her. Mara? Her eyes widened. For 1 second, she looked like the little girl who used to run into my arms whenever thunder frightened her. Then her face collapsed. Dad! She barely got the word out before tears began running down her cheeks. I caught her before her knees gave way. The baby in her arms started crying louder. I looked around the store. People were staring. But I didn't care. I pulled my daughter toward me and whispered, "What happened?" She gripped my jacket so tightly that her fingers trembled. "They left us." My heart seemed to stop. Who? My husband. His mother. Everyone. She looked over her shoulder toward the entrance as though she expected someone to appear. Then she whispered something that chilled me. They told me nobody would ever find me here. I felt anger rising inside me, but beneath that anger was something worse. Guilt. For 3 weeks, I had believed the lie. I had received a letter supposedly written by Mara. I had called her phone repeatedly and received the same explanation from her husband's family. She needed rest. She needed privacy. She was safe. I had wanted to believe them, because believing them was easier than admitting that something might be terribly wrong with my own daughter. But there was something about Mara's face that told me this wasn't simply a family argument. She looked frightened. Not angry. Not embarrassed. Frightened. I took her and the baby to my hotel suite and made sure they were fed, warm, and safe. Only after the baby finally stopped crying did I ask the question I was almost afraid to hear. "Mara, why didn't you call me?" She stared at the floor. "I tried." "What do you mean?" "They took my phone." My jaw tightened. "Who?" She swallowed. Then she looked directly into my eyes. "My husband's family." I thought that was the worst thing she could tell me. I was wrong, because Mara reached into the lining of her damaged coat and pulled out a tiny recording device. She placed it on the table between us. "Dad," she whispered, "before you do anything, you need to hear what they said about me." I pressed the play button. The first voice I heard belonged to my daughter's mother-in-law, and the sentence that followed made my blood run cold. "Once the baby is gone, she has nothing left to protect herself with." I looked at Mara. She was already crying, but she wasn't crying because she was afraid anymore. She was crying because she knew what I was about to discover. And neither of us understood, yet, that this recording was only the first piece of a much bigger plan, because someone had been watching my daughter long before I found her. I played the recording again. This time, I listened without looking at Mara. I needed to hear the words without seeing what they were doing to my daughter. The first voice belonged to Elias Harrow, my daughter's mother-in-law. Calm, controlled, almost gentle. That made it worse. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be." Then came her son's voice. Mara's husband, Adrian. "But she's the mother." Celeste answered immediately. "She's the mother today. That doesn't mean she'll have the same position tomorrow." The recording stopped. I stared at the device. What did she mean by that? Mara wrapped both arms around the baby. "I don't know. You recorded the conversation. You must know something." "I know what they wanted me to believe." Her voice cracked. "They told me Adrian was protecting me. They said the house wasn't safe because of a legal dispute. They said I needed to stay somewhere private until everything was settled. And you believed them?" "For a while." She looked toward the window. "Then they stopped letting me leave." My hands tightened into fists. "How long?" 36 days. 36 days. My daughter had spent more than a month trapped somewhere, while I was being told she was enjoying a quiet recovery. I had missed her birthday. I had ignored the feeling in my stomach because I trusted people who had smiled at me across a dinner table and called themselves family. Then Mara said something that changed the entire situation. "They weren't just keeping me there, Dad." I looked at her. They were waiting for something. "What?" She hesitated. Then she looked down at the baby. "Her." The room became completely silent. I stared at my granddaughter. She was tiny, fragile. Her breathing was uneven from all the crying. "What do they want with her?" "I don't know." Mara's eyes filled with tears. But I heard Adrian talking to his mother one night. What did he say? He said the baby changed everything. I leaned forward. Changed what? She shook her head. I don't know. That answer should have frustrated me. Instead, it frightened me. Because Mara wasn't hiding something. She genuinely didn't know. I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, cars moved through the evening traffic as though the world was perfectly normal. But my world had changed in a grocery store aisle. My daughter had been imprisoned. My granddaughter was somehow part of a plan. And the people behind it knew enough about me to keep me from finding them. Then my phone vibrated. One message. No name. No number I recognized. Just 6 words. You should have left her there. I showed Mara. Her face went pale. Dad. What? They know where I am. I immediately locked the hotel room door. Then another message arrived. This one contained a photograph. I opened it. My stomach dropped. It was a picture of Mara and me walking into the grocery store earlier that evening. Someone had been standing across the street. Watching. I zoomed in. The person's face was hidden beneath a hood. But in their hand was something I recognized. A small silver bracelet. Mara saw it too. She stopped breathing for a moment. Dad. What is it? That belonged to Adrian. I looked back at the photograph. The stranger wasn't just watching us. They had been close enough to leave us a warning. And now I had to find out why Adrian's bracelet was in the hands of someone who had been following my daughter. But before I could make that call, Mara whispered 3 words that changed everything. Adrian isn't missing. Adrian isn't missing. Mara said it so quietly that, for a moment, I wasn't sure I had heard her. I turned toward her. Then where is he? She looked at the photograph on my phone. I don't know. You just told me he isn't missing. He isn't missing to them. That sentence stayed between us. I sat down across from her. Mara, start from the beginning. She took a breath, but before she could speak, the baby began to whimper. Mara immediately pulled her closer. That small movement told me more than words could. She was exhausted. She was terrified. But somehow, through all of it, she had kept fighting. Adrian came to see me, she finally said. When? 2 nights before they left me. Where? The house. What did he say? Mara stared at the floor. He told me I had to trust him. And did you? I wanted to. Her voice broke. I loved him, Dad. Those 4 words hurt more than anything else. Because I could hear the shame in them. She wasn't ashamed that she had loved him. She was ashamed that she still wanted to believe the man she married could not be capable of what she had witnessed. What happened? I asked. He told me there was a problem with some documents. What documents? Our marriage documents. Financial papers. Things I never understood. I leaned forward. Did he ask you to sign something? Mara nodded. He said it was temporary. What did you sign? I don't know. My stomach tightened. You don't know? They brought papers into the room. Adrian told me they were routine. He said if I refused, everything would become worse. Did you sign them? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? She looked at me. Because they told me you would be arrested. I froze. They threatened me with you. The room suddenly felt smaller. Mara continued. They said you had financial problems. They said they could make it look like you had stolen money from your company. I stared at her. For years, I had built my business carefully. Every transaction documented. Every account audited. Every major decision reviewed. But someone had clearly been preparing for this. They hadn't simply isolated my daughter. They had studied her. They had studied me. And they had created a story that could destroy both of us. Then Mara reached inside her bag. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. I found this after Adrian left. I opened it. It was a list. Names. Dates. Bank account numbers. Property addresses. And beside several names were handwritten amounts. But one name made my blood run cold. My name. I looked at Mara. Where did you get this? It was hidden inside Adrian's desk. Did he know you found it? No. I folded the paper. We're going to need someone who understands financial records. Mara shook her head. No. Why? Because that's exactly what they expect you to do. I stopped. She reached for my hand. Dad, they wanted you to find the money. Why? Because the money isn't the real secret. My phone vibrated again. Another unknown message. This time there was no photograph. Only a single sentence. Ask your daughter what happened the night the baby was born. I looked at Mara. She had gone completely still. Mara? Her lips trembled. Dad, what happened that night? She looked down at her sleeping daughter. And when she finally answered, her voice was barely a whisper. She wasn't supposed to survive. I couldn't breathe. Because suddenly, the financial records didn't matter. The threats didn't matter. Even Adrian didn't matter. There was only one question left. Who had wanted my granddaughter dead, and why? She wasn't supposed to survive. Mara's words stayed in the room long after she stopped speaking. I looked at my granddaughter. She was sleeping peacefully now, one tiny hand resting against her cheek. I couldn't understand how anyone could look at that innocent face and decide she was a problem that needed to disappear. I lowered my voice. Tell me what happened. Mara closed her eyes. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she began. The night she was born, everything seemed normal. She explained that Adrian had been beside her at the hospital. He had held her hand. He had smiled. He had even cried when the baby was placed in her arms. But sometime after midnight, Adrian received a phone call. He stepped into the hallway. When he returned, his entire expression had changed. He wasn't happy anymore, Mara whispered. What did he say? He asked the nurse whether the baby had been tested. For what? I didn't know. Mara swallowed. Then he asked about the birth records. That didn't make sense. What was he looking for? I don't know. She paused. About an hour later, a woman came into the room. Celeste? Mara nodded. She wasn't supposed to be there. Adrian had told me she was out of town. What did she do? She looked at the baby. Not lovingly. Not like a grandmother seeing her grandchild for the first time. She looked at her like she was examining evidence. Then she asked the nurse a strange question. Does the mother know? Mara said she immediately felt something was wrong. What did the nurse say? She said, "Know what?" Celeste didn't answer. Instead, she told Adrian they needed to speak privately. The two of them left the room. Mara followed them. She stopped outside the door. And that's when she heard the sentence she could never forget. Celeste said, "If the test confirms it, we have a serious problem." I felt cold. What test? I didn't know. Mara's eyes filled with tears. But I heard Adrian say, "She can't find out." Who? Mara looked at me. Me. The room became silent. I stood and began pacing. Something about this story was wrong. If the baby carried some secret that threatened the Harrow family, why had they waited until after the birth? And why had they allowed Mara to leave the hospital? Unless they hadn't known what they were dealing with until then. I stopped. Mara, did anyone take the baby for testing? She nodded. The next morning. Who? A private doctor. Did you agree? No. What happened? They said it was routine. She wiped her eyes. But when the doctor returned, he looked terrified. Terrified? He wouldn't look at me. Then Mara said something that made my skin crawl. The doctor pulled Adrian aside and whispered something. What? I couldn't hear all of it. But I heard one word. I waited. Mara's voice dropped. Belmont. I stared at her. That doesn't make sense. Your husband's family is the Harrow family. I know. Then why would a doctor mention another family? Mara shook her head. I don't know. I reached for the papers she had found in Adrian's desk. The names. The accounts. The properties. And now a new name. Belmont. I suddenly realized we had been asking the wrong question. We weren't dealing with a husband trying to control his wife. We were dealing with people hiding something much older. Something powerful enough to make a doctor afraid. Something that could explain the money, the threats, and the reason my granddaughter had become a target. Then Mara suddenly grabbed my arm. Dad. What? There was one more thing. She reached into her bag and pulled out a hospital bracelet. It had been torn in half. I looked at the name printed on it. It wasn't my granddaughter's name. It wasn't Mara's. It belonged to another baby born in the same hospital that night. And beneath the name was a handwritten note. Do not let the two families meet. I looked at Mara. She stared back at me trembling. And for the first time, I understood something terrifying. My granddaughter may not have been the target. She may have been the key. I stared at the hospital bracelet in Mara's hand. One sentence was written beneath the unfamiliar baby's name. Do not let the two families meet. I read it twice. Then a third time. Where did you get this? It was inside the envelope Adrian gave me. What envelope? Mara looked confused. He gave it to me the night before we left the hospital. He told me never to open it unless something happened to him. I felt a chill move through me. Something happened to him? He disappeared the next morning. I looked at her. But you just told me Adrian isn't missing. He isn't. Then where is he? Mara shook her head. I don't know. That was the problem. Every answer created another question. I placed the bracelet on the table. Do you know the baby's name? Mara nodded. Evelyn. Evelyn what? She hesitated. Evelyn Cross. I felt something change inside me. Cross. I knew that name. Not personally, but I had seen it in the financial documents. One of the companies connected to the property transactions was Cross Meridian Holdings. At first, I had assumed it was another shell company. Now I wasn't so sure. I opened my laptop. Within minutes, I found the company registration. The business had been established 7 years earlier. Its listed director was a man named Graham Cross. I showed Mara the photograph attached to the corporate record. Her face went white. That's him. Who? The doctor. I stared at the screen. The man who had examined her newborn daughter was the director of a company connected to the same financial network I had been investigating. That couldn't be coincidence. Unless someone wanted me to think it was. I immediately called my financial analyst. Jonah, I need you to search every transaction involving Cross Meridian Holdings. How far back? 7 years. There was silence. That's a lot of records. Then start tonight. While he worked, I asked Mara one more question. What happened to Evelyn? I don't know. Did you ever see her? No. Did anyone tell you she died? Mara slowly shook her head. They told me she was transferred. Transferred where? They wouldn't say. I looked at the bracelet again. 2 babies. 1 hospital. 2 families. And someone terrified that those 2 worlds might collide. Then my analyst called. His voice was different this time. Sir, you need to see this. What did you find? There are payments between Cross Meridian and 3 companies controlled by the Harrow family. How much? Enough to make this very serious. Give me the number. He hesitated. Approximately $4.8 million over 18 months. Mara heard him. Her eyes filled with disbelief. Why would Adrian's family pay a company connected to that doctor? I didn't answer, because another possibility had just entered my mind. Maybe the doctor wasn't being paid to protect the baby. Maybe he was being paid to keep the truth buried. Then Jonah said something that made the room go completely silent. There's one more thing. What? The payments stopped 11 months ago. Why? I checked the date. His voice became quieter. They stopped exactly 3 days before your granddaughter was born. I looked at Mara. She was staring at me. And then her face changed. Dad. What? The doctor knew she was coming. Before I could respond, someone knocked on the hotel door. 3 slow knocks. Mara grabbed the baby. I motioned for her to stay behind me. Another knock. Then a man's voice came from the hallway. Mr. Vale. I didn't answer. The voice came again. I know you're in there. I looked through the peephole. A man stood outside, and hanging from his fingers was a hospital bracelet. Not Evelyn's. Not my granddaughter's. Mara's. Then he lifted his eyes directly toward the peephole, and smiled. You finally found the second child. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The man stood outside my hotel room, holding Mara's hospital bracelet between 2 fingers. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was waiting. I motioned for Mara to move toward the bathroom with the baby. She didn't argue. That frightened me more than anything. My daughter had spent weeks being controlled by other people. Now she understood exactly what kind of danger stood outside that door. I kept my eye on the peephole. Who are you? The man answered calmly. My name is Caleb Rourke. And why do you have my daughter's hospital bracelet? A pause. Because I was there the night your granddaughter was born. My hand tightened around the door handle. Where? At the hospital. Mara suddenly whispered from behind me. Dad, don't open it. Caleb heard her. His expression changed. You should listen to her. That was not what I expected. I opened the door only a few inches, keeping the security chain in place. Caleb looked directly at me. He was probably in his late 50s. Gray hair. Dark coat. No visible weapon. But there was something in his eyes that made me uncomfortable. He looked like a man who had spent years carrying information he wasn't supposed to possess. You need to leave, I said. I will. He handed me the bracelet. But first, you need to know why they wanted your daughter gone. I took it. Who is they? Caleb looked past me. His eyes found Mara. Your husband's family isn't the organization running this. Mara went pale. What organization? Caleb lowered his voice. The people behind them. I stared at him. You're saying the Harrows are working for someone else? Yes. Who? I don't know the entire structure. That answer irritated me. You came to my room in the middle of the night, carrying my daughter's hospital bracelet. Don't tell me you don't know anything. He looked at me for several seconds. Then he said, "I know what happened to Evelyn." Mara stepped forward. "Where is she?" Caleb looked at her. "Alive." Mara covered her mouth. I felt the same shock. Alive. After all these months, the other baby was alive. Where? I can't tell you yet. You expect me to trust you? No. His answer came instantly. You shouldn't trust me. That stopped me. Caleb reached inside his coat. I immediately stepped between him and Mara. He slowly pulled out a small envelope. Then he placed it on the floor. This belonged to Adrian. My heart pounded. Why do you have it? Because Adrian gave it to me. When? 3 weeks ago. Mara stared at him. That's impossible. Why? Because 3 weeks ago, they told me Adrian was out of the country. Caleb nodded. He wasn't. I opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. Adrian stood beside another man. The second man was older, powerful, and standing behind them was the doctor from the hospital. On the back of the photograph, Adrian had written 6 words. Dad, I'm sorry. I was wrong. My breathing stopped. Dad? I looked at Mara. She looked equally confused. Adrian's father died 8 years ago, she whispered. I turned the photograph over again. There was something else written beneath the first sentence. A date and an address. I recognized the address immediately. It was one of the properties connected to the financial transactions I had uncovered. But the final line was what truly terrified me. If they find Mara, they will come for the baby next. I looked toward my daughter. She was holding her child against her chest. Then Caleb said something that made every piece fall into place. They weren't trying to hide your granddaughter. He looked at me. They were trying to hide who she belongs to. Before I could ask what he meant, Caleb's phone suddenly rang. He glanced at the screen. His face changed. Get away from the windows. What? Now. I pulled Mara down. A second later, the hotel window exploded. Glass flew across the room. Mara screamed. The baby began crying. I grabbed both of them and dragged them behind the bed. Caleb was already moving toward the door. Then he looked back at me. There's a car waiting downstairs. Whose? He shook his head. That's the problem. He opened the door. And before disappearing into the hallway, he said the one thing I knew I would never forget. Your daughter isn't the only person they lied to. I looked at Mara. She was trembling. Then her eyes moved to the photograph in my hand. And suddenly she whispered, Dad, that's not Adrian. The man standing beside the doctor wasn't her husband at all. That's not Adrian. Mara's voice was barely audible. I looked at the photograph again. She was right. The man standing beside the doctor had Adrian's height, Adrian's dark hair, even the same expensive suit. But his face was different. Not dramatically. Just enough. A slightly different jaw. Different eyes. A scar beneath his left ear that Adrian had never had. For the first time that night, I understood why Mara had been so confused. Someone had been impersonating her husband. But why? I turned toward her. Mara, how certain are you? She didn't hesitate. 100%. Then she pointed at the photograph. That man came to the house once. When? Before the baby was born. What did he say? He introduced himself as Adrian's cousin. I felt a cold pressure in my chest. Did Adrian ever mention him? No. Did anyone else? She shook her head. Then why did you think he was Adrian? Because everyone else treated him like he was. That sentence disturbed me. Not because it sounded impossible. Because it sounded organized. Someone had deliberately created a false identity. And enough people had participated to make Mara doubt her own eyes. I picked up my phone and called Jonah. He answered immediately. Are you safe? Not exactly. I told him what had happened. Then I sent him the photograph. Find out who this man is. How? Start with every company connected to Cross Meridian. Search corporate records, property records, anything you can access. There was a pause. Then Jonah said, I found something earlier. What? Adrian's passport records. My attention sharpened. Go on. The passport connected to his latest travel history shows he left the country 6 weeks ago. Mara stared at me. That can't be true. I know, I said. Jonah continued. But there's another record. What kind? A second passport. My stomach tightened. Same name? No. Whose? Jonah hesitated. The name is Elias Harrow. Mara suddenly grabbed the table. Her face drained of color. That's Adrian's older brother. I looked at her. Adrian doesn't have an older brother. She shook her head. He did. Did. They told me he died before Adrian was born. Silence. I slowly looked at the photograph. The resemblance suddenly became obvious. The same eyes. The same expression. The same scar. The man beside the doctor wasn't Adrian. He was Elias. A supposedly dead man who had somehow appeared in a hospital, participated in the birth of my granddaughter, and then disappeared. But that wasn't the worst part. Jonah spoke again. Sir, there's something else. What? The company payments we discussed? Yes. They weren't going to the doctor. Then where? An account belonging to Elias Harrow. Mara covered her mouth. I closed my eyes for a moment. The money. The hospital. The false identity. The second baby. Everything was beginning to connect. But one question remained. Why had Elias needed another child? Then I remembered the message. Ask your daughter what happened the night the baby was born. I looked at Mara. Did anyone take blood from your daughter? She froze. Yes. When? Right after delivery. Who? The doctor. I felt my heartbeat quicken. Did they take blood from the baby too? Mara nodded. Why? I thought it was routine. I stood completely still. Then I understood. They hadn't been testing the baby for an illness. They had been testing identity. And suddenly the entire conspiracy made sense. Someone wasn't trying to steal my granddaughter. They were trying to prove something about her blood. Something connected to the Harrow family. Something worth millions. Something powerful enough to justify replacing identities, manipulating records, and hiding another child. Then Jonah said the words that made my blood run cold. Sir, I found the original hospital record. What does it say? The birth certificate was altered. Whose? Mara's daughter. I looked at my granddaughter. What was the original name? Jonah hesitated. Then he answered. Evelyn Cross. Mara stopped breathing. The baby in her arms stirred. And then another message appeared on my phone. This time, there was no threat. Only an address. And underneath it, bring the child. Come alone. I looked at Mara. She was crying silently. Then she whispered, Dad, they know we found the truth. I folded the phone into my hand. No. I looked toward the shattered window. They know something worse. Mara stared at me. What? I looked at the sleeping baby. They know we found the child they thought was dead. I stared at the message. Bring the child. Come alone. For weeks, they had controlled the story. They controlled what Mara believed. They controlled what I believed. They even controlled the records that were supposed to prove what had happened. But now they had made one mistake. They had shown me what they were afraid of. The truth. I looked at Mara. We're not going. She wiped the tears from her face. Then what do? We make them come to us. I called Jonah. Send everything you found to every investigator, attorney, and regulator you trust. Are you sure? No. I looked at the baby. But I'm done being afraid. Within minutes, the evidence began moving. Bank records, altered hospital documents, corporate registrations, the photograph of Elias, and the recording Mara had secretly made. Everything went to people who could no longer be threatened into silence. Then we waited. 2 hours later, Jonah called. There's been a development. What? Someone just transferred $2.6 million from one of the Harrow accounts. Where? An offshore account. Whose name? Jonah paused. Elias Harrow. I closed my eyes. Find him. We already did. My eyes opened. Where? An abandoned medical facility outside the city. The same address from the photograph. I looked at Mara. She understood immediately. We're going, she said. No. You can't leave me behind. I wanted to argue. But she was right. This wasn't just my fight anymore. We drove there with Caleb following several minutes behind us. The building was almost completely dark. Inside, we found old hospital equipment, empty files, and photographs. Dozens of them. Children. Families. Dates. Names. Then Mara stopped. Her hand covered her mouth. On the wall were 2 photographs taken on the same night. One showed her newborn daughter. The other showed Evelyn Cross. But they were wearing identical hospital blankets. And beneath both photographs was the same note. Identity confirmed. Mara began crying. I pulled her close. You're safe now. No, Dad. She shook her head. I think I finally understand. What? They didn't want the baby because of money. She pointed toward the photographs. They wanted her because of who her biological father was. Before I could respond, a light turned on behind us. A voice came from the darkness. You're smarter than I expected. I turned. Elias Harrow stepped into the room. The man everyone believed had been dead for years. Mara froze. Elias. He looked at her. Then at the baby. I never wanted her hurt. I stepped between him and my family. Then why did you do all this? His expression changed. Because my family built an empire on a lie. He explained everything. Years earlier, the Harrows had discovered that Elias had survived an accident everyone believed had killed him. Instead of revealing the truth, they used his identity to move money, control companies, and manipulate inheritance records. But when Adrian discovered what they were doing, he tried to expose them. And that's when Mara became useful. Their marriage gave them access to my business, my finances, and eventually my trust. The baby was never supposed to be harmed. She was proof. Proof that the Harrow family had falsified a bloodline for generations. Mara stared at Elias. Why did you let them take me? His eyes filled with regret. Because I was afraid. I stepped closer. That fear destroyed my daughter. I know. His voice broke. And I'll spend the rest of my life paying for it. Sirens suddenly echoed outside. Elias looked toward the windows. Caleb had arrived. Behind him were federal investigators. The conspiracy that had survived for years was finally collapsing. Mara held her daughter tighter. I looked at her face. For weeks, I had wanted revenge. But standing there, watching the people who had hurt her finally lose control, I realized something. The greatest punishment wasn't destroying them. It was taking away their power to control our lives. Mara leaned against me. Dad. Yes. I'm sorry. I held her tighter. You don't ever apologize for surviving. She began to cry. And this time I cried with her. Because I finally understood the truth. I hadn't rescued my daughter that night in the grocery store. She had rescued herself. I had simply arrived in time to help her finish the fight. And as the investigators carried boxes of evidence out of that building, my granddaughter opened her eyes. She looked at me, then smiled. After everything that had happened, after every lie, every threat, every night Mara had spent believing nobody was coming, she was finally safe. And sometimes, justice doesn't arrive with revenge. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the arms of the person you almost lost. And that was enough.